Jason, we're going to bring you on now. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Pop?
Dude, first of all, in the Space Force
uniform.
Yeah, I got approval to come on air, so thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. First question I have for you, I specifically wore this for you. Are we competitors? If I have a NASA on,
we're competitors now.
We're competitors, or are we compadres? Are we co-conspirators?
We're friends.
Friends? All right. Let's start first because you got the uniform on. Space Force. What the hell is Space Force? Like the first time I heard this, I was like, "Oh, that's a hilarious internet meme." Like, no, and then literally we have Space Force. Like, what is Space Force?
Yeah, Space Force is a new military branch dedicated to organizing, training, and equipping military forces in support of and presented to the new designated geographic combatant command called Space, or U.S. Spacecom. So think it does the same thing that like you would expect the Army to do for different combatant commands, but for space. When you say something is a weapon system or something is a defense system, some people like jump automatically to thinking you're describing a gun or something like that. But a lot of things are defense systems and or weapon systems that you wouldn't intuitively think about. So for example, the Romans created stone roads between ports, right? That was created by the Roman legion. It was a defense system so that they could get to, defend their ports easier terrestrially. Or for example, like this is a good example. Why do you think we have GPS? If I ask you that.
Why?
But people often forget that GPS is a weapon system. It exists to mutually assure the destruction of other countries, right? There's a lot of weapon systems like we have that do the same thing, right? Nuclear, hardened satellite communications, right? TCP/IP, the internet, right? The internet exists so that we can survive. We can have C2 that survives a nuclear level strike. SHA, right? As in SHA 256, right? As in designed by the NSA. These are systems that are explicitly intended for the defense of the United States. And so, if we keep pulling that thread, eventually we get to all of the critical enabling technologies that go into Bitcoin. We get TCP/IP, we get SHA, we get precision timing and synchronization of nodes through GPS. We get it written in C++, which was something that an American designed at Bell Laboratories. Every single piece of Bitcoin that fundamentally matters is effectively a piece of technology that was designed to improve military scale defense, particularly against the destruction of nukes. And so if you continue to pull that thread a little bit further and a little bit further, you can start to conceptualize Bitcoin as way more than just money. Bitcoin is, and I know a lot of people on Twitter will be angry at me for saying this, Bitcoin is a weapon system, just like GPS is a weapon system. It is a weapon system designed explicitly for self-defense, and it is extremely effective, right? It is literally nuclear resistant. Like every piece of it was designed explicitly to be resistant to nuclear strikes.
And so my thought process was like, the world changes when we go from like an analog based world to a digital based world. And now it's not about offense, it's about defense, which actually seems to be somewhat in line with what you're talking about here of the money and the quote unquote army being one, right? They come together in a package.
Yeah. So I can give you my thoughts, and for the record, all of these thoughts are my thoughts. These do not represent the DoD thoughts. Okay. So first of all, yeah, it is interesting the correlation between the entity with the dominant military tends to have the world reserve currency, right? If you read that. It's also interesting that if you read history is effectively a time partitioned ledger written by those who projected the most kinetic power and won, right? history is written by the victors. History is written by those who won the power projection game, right? The competition. Okay. So that's interesting. The distinction between offense and defense is one that, especially in the Space Force, is not very useful. We can, and I can kind of I'll illustrate that. If China were to put, or let's say China, Russia-stan, were to put a nuclear tipped hypersonic missile into a parking orbit around the moon, is that an offensive action or is that a defensive action?
You're going to be more of an expert than me. I don't know. What is it?
Right. So, okay, let's ask another question. If the United States blows up that nuclear tipped hypersonic warhead in orbit around the moon, is that an offensive action or is that a defensive action?
Hopefully you got the answers, man, because I don't.
Yeah, the answer is physics doesn't care, right? Like the answer is physics is blind to the distinction between offense and defense. How Bitcoin works and why it's so similar to the primary value delivered function of militaries. It's because this, all civilization, all living creatures obey the social consensus protocol that those who project the most kinetic power in the most clever way earn the right to set the state and chain of custody of limited resources. No one gets the option to unsubscribe from this social consensus protocol, right? Those who project the most kinetic power set the state and chain of custody. Okay. That is true not only for animals, right? If I threw a juicy steak in between a pack of wolves, who gets the steak?
Whoever gets there first, whoever's the strongest.
Right. So animals actually establish their own pecking order based off of their capability to project power. Mm-hmm. Right. Humans are no different. We're animals too. There's limited resources. It is an existential necessity for us to establish a pecking order to achieve consensus on the legitimate state and chain of custody of all property. We do it through kinetic power projection. The cool thing about kinetic power projection is it's a permissionless protocol. I don't need the permission of another country or another person if I can project enough power in the clever way, right? That's how you establish a permissionless control structure over all, as you would say, analog property. But what was really, really fascinating about Bitcoin specifically is that it takes this exact same power projection game, right? But instead of kinetically derived joules, it's electrically derived joules. Bitcoin takes the exact same game, right? That all animals have been playing for 4 billion years, but it transposes that game digitally. So instead of kinetic proof of work, you do electric proof of work. Those who project the most electric power and win the competition earn the right to set the state and chain of custody of the underlying piece of property, in this case, Satoshis. And if those entities, which we would call miners, ever become oppressive, right? If they ever just start mining empty blocks and not allowing people to transact over the ledger, then the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it restores the ability for all users to countervail the control authority of those oppressors through what? Projection of power. And in Bitcoin denominated terms, it always gets easier to project more power. It's never been cheaper to mine, right? It's cheaper to mine now with an S19 than it is to mine with, your USB miners from a while ago in Bitcoin denominated terms, which means it's always getting easier and easier for users to countervail the control authority of oppressors if they emerge. And so that's interesting because then what effectively is the primary value delivered function of Bitcoin is not to create a piece of digital property. That part to me is boring. the part that is interesting to me is you have restored a permissionless control structure over a property using the exact same way, like the exact same mechanism as warfare. And you've done so after civilization has effectively stalemated itself with nuclear power. The problem with nuclear weapons is it's too expensive to use them, right? So civilization has lost their ability to have permissionless control structure over property, right? Does that make sense? Like
it makes complete sense.
Yeah, we risk nuclear annihilation.
Correct.
To use this power projection protocol now. So that's bad. By the way, it's not the first time it happens. It happens all the time in nature. So animals will actually grow random power projection mechanisms out of their foreheads so that they can continue to play the game and establish pecking order and to achieve consensus on the legitimate state and chain of custody of resources like territory, right? We call them antlers, right? We call them, look at bugs with their weird horns on the top, right? They evolved a way to continue the power projection game, but do so in a way that won't threaten the species, right? Like we're not going to kill each other anymore. We're just going to awkwardly clash our antlers together. And then that's how we're going to decide who gets to own what. And so this sounds ridiculous, I know, but I keep telling people Bitcoin are human antlers. We have reestablished a way to achieve a permissionless control structure over property, which is needed to defend against oppression, but still maintain fairness, right? Still maintain the ability to achieve consensus on the legitimate state and chain of custody of a property. And so if you transpose money into a digital commodity and reestablish a power projection permissionless control structure over it, then what you've effectively done, and I know this is wacko, but what you have effectively done is digitally transformed warfare itself from a kinetic power projection game into an electric power projection game. And so insofar as we fight each other to defend against money, we don't need to. And the last thing I'll say before opening it for comments is this. And this is why I drew that picture, because
we have the picture. We have the picture here that we're going to show everyone.
Okay, so the thing, I wrote this in class. I was not paying attention to class. The thing that bothers me about like these ESG accusations against Bitcoin is like they fundamentally misunderstand what the point of Bitcoin is, right? They fundamentally misunderstand what the point of all that energy or all that power projection is. The point of projecting that much power is to make it too expensive to attack the ledger, right? Like to make it too expensive to be uncooperative with the people who use Bitcoin. This is exactly what the military does, right? The power of every single bomb, the power of every single bullet, the power of every single engine behind every single plane or ship or sub or truck or tank, the power of every heartbeat of every service member of every military in the world is measured in watts. And those watts are spent explicitly to protect and defend resources, up until Bitcoin to protect and defend monetary resources. And to say that Bitcoin is a waste of energy is effectively the same as saying your military is a waste of energy. It's a waste of energy to have a standing military to protect our rule of law or whatever we're trying to protect. Like, yeah, it's inefficient to sail a bunch of carrier battle groups through the ocean, right? You know, it's more inefficient, Anthony, than sailing a bunch of carrier battle groups or testing about a bunch of nuclear missiles all the time. Being invaded, being conquered, that's pretty inefficient. And if you want to learn what happens to people who decide not to build a standing military, read history. History is literally just you know, a story of all the countries that decided that it was too inefficient to have a standing military, right? And so it's like, oh, Bitcoin's bad because it projects too much power. It's like saying, dollar for dollar, I wish my military projected less power. It's like you don't understand the point of Bitcoin. The point of Bitcoin is to defend the network, to defend every user that volunteers to make that underlying piece of property their form of money. What's super interesting about Bitcoin is it creates a kind of game theory stability point, a Schelling point that I am calling in my thesis mutually assured preservation. It's to distinguish it from the Schelling point that we get with kinetic proof of work, which is mutually assured destruction. So the way we achieve stability right now through kinetic proof of work is to basically hold a knife to each other's throats and say, don't do anything bad, right? That's how we achieve stability. With Bitcoin, everything that a nation does to increase the hash rate is beneficial to everyone else, assuming they don't 51% attack the network. So you were actually by quote, projecting more electric power in Bitcoin, you are actually mutually assuring the preservation of the security of your opponent. And so this gets really interesting because maybe instead of fighting, you just let them improve the hash rate, let them improve the security, so long as it doesn't 51% attack the network. Or if everyone's using the same currency, then the productivity of your opponent means real world gains for you too, right? And so that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it creates frenemies, right? It doesn't matter who you are. If you use Bitcoin, you are benefiting each other mutually. There's nothing that says it has to be a kinetic power projection protocol. It could be electric. Cool thing about electric is no one has to bleed, right? And another thing too, which is super fascinating, is with kinetic power projection, you basically destroy infrastructure, right? The end of the war is rubble, right? Infrastructure is destroyed as you scale kinetic power projection higher and higher and higher to the point where you get atomic level horrors. With electric power projection, the end game is more infrastructure, cheaper energy for everybody, right? So the end of a hash war is free energy and abundance for everybody. And you achieve that using literally the same physics. It is the same physics. So why don't we play that game over monetary property? That sounds like a good idea.
Correct. Because I don't think I've ever heard somebody describe Bitcoin as having kind of this wrapped value of both the money with a stand-in army that is neither offensive or defensive, but has the ability to use that electrical power production. And when you think of it in terms of the electrical power production being the single greatest kind of protection that you can provide to a monetary asset, I think it becomes pretty clear that other assets over time, and again, what that time frame is up for debate, people will lose trust and frankly lose appetite, either from an ethical standpoint or kind of a rational standpoint, in wanting bloodshed to protect that monetary premium or those monetary assets. And so if I'm given the choice between send young men and women to war or use electrical power production to protect my assets, I think most people over time decide, well, that electrical thing sounds pretty damn good, right? Sounds like that's more humane. Sounds like it's more effective. It's more efficient. And I think more importantly, it shows a path to a positive sum world where when you begin to understand the importance of that and the impact of that, then ultimately I think it falls back to this comment that I always make, which is the rise and adoption of Bitcoin, in my personal opinion, will do more good for the world than all philanthropy combined.
Yeah, just my LinkedIn and my Twitter. I use both of those to essentially test ideas for the research I'm doing and to be fully transparent about everything that I'm doing. Cool. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, John. Thanks, Pomp. Appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Later.